Thank you very much for that generous introduction, and good morning to everyone, the organizers of this amazing conference, which I think is quite very, very timely, and everyone who is present here, and to the University of Nairobi, a prestigious institution. This is my fifth time coming here, and I was in this room in April this year. But not for this event, but for other events. And so, as they say in Africa, all protocol observed. All protocol observed. And thanks for this timely topic. It is not just a moment to look at things differently, but it is also a moment to reflect on the realities that the entire world faces, and more so the African continent. We're talking about the world in which we are already 4 years into the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which intend to leave no one behind. So what you're going to hear me do in this 25 to about 27 minutes with this keynote speech is that I'll use a lot of African proverbs, because Africa have a lot of abundance, not just abundance in minerals, and not just abundance in ideas, but also abundance in proverbs. And you will hear a lot of those. What we understand and what we know is that we are what our thinking makes us. We are what our thinking makes us. This African proverb underscores the importance of content in our thoughts. The Bible, for example, if you take it, which is actually one of the global bestsellers over generations, combining science, combining logic, combining history, and metaphysics, confirms this across multiple scriptures. In Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, for instance, we are simply told that as someone thinks within himself, so he is. So the message is quite very clear. From the biblical perspective and even from the African proverb perspective, the message is quite very clear that the power of both success and failure lies in the content of our thoughts. The power of both success and failure lies within the content of our thoughts. What we think, we become. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and how this power can be unlocked for much needed success, especially in the context of the African continent, which my talk is going to center on, is the essence of our discussion here today. Those who accomplish great things pay attention to little things. Those who accomplish great things pay attention to little things. This is an African proverb, and this African proverb tells us, it reminds us that every occurrence, no matter how small we perceive it, no matter how small we perceive its impact, matters. Every occurrence. In the context of our discussion today, when you look across the entire globe, from Africa to Europe to the Americas and on to Asia, every top university in these regions hosts a center or an institute of African studies. If you look across the entire world, most of the top universities host an Institute of African Studies. Arguably, this institute are staffed with the best brains in the entire world. In each of these institutes, regardless of the region in the world, hosting this, they are staffed with the best brains that the human race is blessed with. But just as the Zulu people would say, even the most beautiful fig may contain a worm. As admirable as these institutions are, very, very important and crucial to shaping critical thinking across the entire world, we cannot also ignore the fact that their continuous and active impact on Africa's development has been appreciated and is important, but there is a glaring gap in the context of key fundamentals that we know: food insecurity, youth unemployment, and lack of enterprise creation across the entire African continent, or driven competitiveness. One would not be able to conclude without saying that in as much as we have these institutions across the entire world, the problems that the African continent faces and other parts of the world have not actually been resolved, not just because of lack of critical thinking, but sometimes because the critical thinking do not actually align to inform sometimes the actions on the ground. And even when it is informed on the ground, the uptake to feedback to policy is not always optimal. As we gather here today, just as has been the case in the past, despite having the knowledge, despite critical thinking, which is quite very, very important, that have led to solutions to solve problems in the entire world, Africa continues sometimes to make global headlines, mostly for the wrong reasons. As we're speaking today, last night, And even tonight, 257 million citizens in the continent go to bed with their stomach aching of hunger. As we're speaking today, and even tomorrow and days to come, 12 million youth each and every year are getting into the labor market and competing with fewer jobs. 3 million jobs, meaning that the continent is supposed to be creating 1 million jobs each and every month, but that is not the case. As we are speaking today, the fact that people go to bed with their stomach aching of hunger, we are in a continent that have 65% of uncultivated arable land, the biggest in the entire globe. But a continent that is losing 48 billion US dollars each and every year as a result of post-harvest losses. Paradoxical. 257 million people going hungry while the continent loses food. And even right here in Kenya, as we're speaking today, Kenya loses up to about 500 million US dollars each and every year and imports food over 100 million worth of incomes that could be actually be creating opportunities and putting more money in pockets. Yet simply we know that decentralizing solar dryers, which can actually be fabricated by young people into local communities to help mamambogas, to help amoras add value, can actually be able to be done so 48 times even faster. And this will not only ensure that the food can be able not to be wasted, but at the same time can actually be preserved. And by this increased shelf life, if these actions are taken, instead of investing in decentralizing these solar dryers or solar technology to power value addition to recover lost of this food, the continent is importing food each and every year worth 35 billion US dollars. That literally means importing unemployment and exporting employment. Why 257 million people go to bed hungry? And this figure of 35 billion is projected in the next 5 years to reach about 110 billion US dollars. This failure to add to what the continent produces, regardless of the very clear competitive advantage in arable land and renewable energy, has seen the economies in the African continent remain at the bottom, because you cannot be able to prosper at the bottom of the value chain when you don't add value to the resources that you have. That is a fact and proven so many times. In this area of global competitiveness, African economies are 20 times less competitive as compared to competitors in the global space. And this is why the continent, 150 billion a year agro-food market creates incomes opportunities elsewhere as they import food. Just to give an example, just consider cocoa, a crop that is the primary ingredient of chocolates, enjoyed the entire world over. While God gave the continent the privilege of having the largest producer globally, the entire continent gets just a dismal 2% of the 100 billion worth global chocolate market. There is not a single indigenous chocolate market in any African continent. If there is any, please, I stand corrected. Chocolate brand that is actually what we see every day, that is popular across the world. There is no single indigenous chocolate brand in the continent. The continent prefers not to add value to what they produce. Consequently, 98 billion worth of enterprises, worth of jobs, worth of capital to build quality lives are lost. If you take the cassava crop, which is a climate resilient crop, that is actually worth 20 billion in the global allergen-free markets, the continent is not even adding value to it and benefiting almost nothing in totality, considering all these value chains, without even talking the minerals underneath. Just the agro value chain is worth a 1 trillion economy that can be unlocked through adding value using clean energy to power this in less than 10 years from today. Distinguished colleagues, amidst all these that I have enumerated, though they may sound technical, I was actually driving to a point in which we must be able to understand that amidst all these challenges, there is an elephant in the room called climate change that is already redefining the contours of this continent more dramatically than any other. From the droughts in the Horn of Africa here, where recently they've affected Kenya, down to the cyclones in the southern part of the continent. Just a couple of months ago, Cyclone Ida actually killed over 1,000 people, affected so many lives and plunged so many people into suffering. These are realities that we live with today. And climate change would affect every facet of our lives and reverse the development gains that have been made, especially in the entire African continent. If you take Kenya, is ranked as the 32nd most vulnerable country globally and loses up to about 500 million every year due to climate change effects, including droughts and floods. These are the stark realities that confront the African continent, and nobody is immune, even in the global community. While these realities should be the priority of critical thinking in the continent, this sometimes is mostly, in some cases, not so. But we must be able then to use these remaining minutes to interrogate and correct how with these challenges of food insecurity, climate change, youth unemployment, poverty, how can critical thinking be a solution to address and lift Africa from where it is today? If we miss to answer that question, we might not be able to make meaningful progress. A critical and honest soul searching will lead to a reason best summed up in one of my favorite African proverbs, that water that has been begged for does not quench the thirst. You cannot survive on borrowed salt. Another African proverb. As a continent, sometimes the continent have deflected the responsibility of critical thinking, something that is the personal responsibility of each and every citizen. Every citizen, out of the 1.2 billion citizens, everyone should be part of this critical thinking. It cannot be left just to few people. The continent has deflected the responsibility, something that is a personal responsibility of each and every citizen, and making critical thinking not really to become the common denominator that should underpin any development, every development effort. Critical thinking towards development solutions, a task that is upon each and every citizen in the continent, has been left to a few. It is perceived as an academic undertaking and talked about it sometimes as if academic undertaking is not a privilege. Rather than the lifeblood of personal and continental development that it should be, this is not seen that way. It is perceived as the preserve of renowned institutes and academicians across the globe. And what we have as a result is this vacuum. Despite the excellent ideas, the excellent thought processes, the excellent research, the excellent critical thinking that goes on each and every day, sometimes it's not taken up. And what we have as a result is this glaring gap that is resulting to food insecurity, youth unemployment, poverty levels worse than anywhere that we've ever seen. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in this development philosophy and ideals, this vacuum continues to be filled, sometimes not in the right way. And so what we must then be able to discuss is, how do we then leverage a different vision in critical thinking to be able to ensure that these 257 million people that go to bed every day can actually be addressed, that the millions of unemployed youth across the entire continent, whom many are buried under the Mediterranean Sea in search of greener pastures, or some sold into past-free sums of money as they cross the Sahara Desert, can actually be addressed. The state of affairs is actually urgent if we are to achieve the sustainable development goals. But the first step in doing so lies in prioritizing people as the primary drivers of development. Any critical thinking process that do not put people at the center of it misses the point. We do not do development for people. People do development for themselves. Our role should be to facilitate the process. If we miss that point, then we might not be able to solve these intrinsic challenges that have been there for over 60 years. And so prioritizing people are the primary drivers of development, not mineral resources or material resources, is crucial. Prioritizing people, putting them at the center stage, is crucial. This is because a skilled person capable of turning challenges into enterprise opportunities is 4 times the value of produced capital and 15 times the value of natural capital. That is what a skilled person is worth. Your skill, my skill, and that of the 1.2 billion African citizens across the continent is 4 times the value of all the built and produced capital in the entire African continent. It exceeds the value of the building that we see in our beautiful cities. It exceeds the thousands of kilometers of paved roads, networks in the entire continent, and the little manufactured goods that the continent produces. In addition, your skill, my skill, and the skill of the 1.2 billion citizens in the entire African continent is 15 times the value of the natural resources the continent have got. Be it land, be it water, be it gold, be it diamonds, be it oil, be it all the minerals, the abundant sunshine, the wildlife, fisheries, forests, and you name it. These facts send a resounding message that every living human being on this planet Earth, every living person is endowed with adequate capacity for critical thinking, for critical thought, and that this capacity must be unlocked in each and every one regardless of where he or she comes from, regardless of religion, regardless of creed, regardless of country, regardless of tribe. It doesn't really matter. Each and every one, capacity must be unlocked. And if we are to see critical thinking work for the interest of the continent, it is the pathway to take. That's the pathway to take. And I don't know about you, these challenges that I've enumerated and which you already know, I draw personal significant encouragement from this, because what I know is that from this scenario of challenges, there are already solutions from the critical thought processes that have already gone in. But it tells me that Africa is a place to be if you want to build yourself and touch the lives of others. It also tells me, these challenges also tell me that Africa is a place to be if you want your talents to count. That Africa is a place to be if you want your education to count. That Africa is a place to be if you want your critical thought process or your critical thinking to have an opportunity for the most impacted people, because we have people who are suffering each and every day and they need solutions, and critical thinking should be to devise solutions to the challenges, especially under this changing climate where poverty will be exacerbated, where food insecurity will be exacerbated, where water stress will force millions of people to seek sanctuaries in places not their own. So rather than fend under these challenges, they should inspire us. And this starts with a common African proverb that if you do not know where you are going, any road will take you there. If you do not know where you are going, any road will take you there. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the message is clear. The level of success we can register with our inherent potential for critical thinking depends upon the vision that each and everyone crafts for him or herself. What each of us ought to ask is these two critical questions. Where do you see your inherent potential for critical thinking, be it your skills, your talents, even leveraging on your cultures and beliefs, fit within the broader agenda of transforming the entire African continent? And the second, where does this inherent ability fit in creating enterprise opportunities to solve these challenges that we keep talking about and has been talked about over 60 years? Food insecurity, unemployment, poverty, declining economic productivity. It is in answering these questions, which I call them sobering questions, that each of us can craft a much needed clear vision. Everybody needs to have a clear vision, what I call an unborrowed vision, that sets the foundation for meaningful critical thinking, for our success as individuals, for our success as a community, for our success as a continent, for our success as a world, to truly ensure that no one is left behind. And just as we ponder on taking the first step in this trajectory, let us be encouraged that throughout time memorial, people like us seated here today and those across the entire world have taken steps in this trajectory. So let us be encouraged that throughout the centuries, there were men and women, critical thinkers, just like you seated here today, and others elsewhere, who took the first step down roads that were new. But they were armed with nothing but only a vision to solve problems. Only with a vision to solve problems. Their goals differed. But just like us today, the only thing that they had in common was that the step was first and the vision was new towards a common goal of solving and providing solutions to the challenges affecting men and women of that time. The vision was unborrowed. But as they stepped out, the response that they got was in two words: hatred, jealousy. That was the response they got. These great thinkers, these great creators, these artists, these scientists, these inventors stood alone against the men of their time, Every great thought that they proposed was opposed. Every great invention was denounced. The airplane was considered impossible. Anesthesia was considered sinful. But these critical thinkers, with their own borrowed vision, aimed with providing solutions to the challenges that they faced at the time, went ahead to do what was right, what they set their sight on. They fought, they suffered, and they paid the price of hatred and jealousy. But despite all this hatred, they endured and became victorious because they stood for what was right, because they did what was right to provide solutions to the challenges of the time. So as it was then, so it is today. And this is a spirit of dedication, the spirit of collectivism, of kindness, of selflessness. And thanks to what they did, our lives today have become better. We have aviation, we have pharmaceutical industries, we have telecommunication, we have architecture, the arts and the entertainment aspects that we all enjoy today as a result of unwavering resolve of visionary critical thinkers of yesteryears, who were men and women just like us today. So this takes me to 5 critical aspects that I want to leave you with, which is, the first one is economic fundamentals matter. Anything we do without premising it within the economic fundamentals will be missing the point. And this summed up in this African proverb that rain beats a leopard's skin, but it does not watch at the spots. This African proverb reminds us that economic fundamentals do not change in anywhere across the globe. Economic fundamentals do not change. Fundamentals like the need to put food on the table, for a mother to ensure that her child can be fed before she goes to school, that she can have money when she is sick or her child is sick so they can get best medical care. Economic fundamentals are the same anywhere in the world. And these are realities that face millions across the entire African continent today. Fundamentals to create incomes, jobs, to enhance competitiveness of economy, to build climate resilience. And therefore the message is quite very clear, that critical thinking endeavors must be geared towards addressing socio-economic and environmental fundamentals that confront us today. And specific to environment and climate fundamental, Africa's low economic performance is the primary driver of the continent's vulnerability to climate change. If you take Cyclone Idai, that killed over 1,000 people. And if you take hurricanes category 5s, that happens in the United States. Of course, there's destruction of property. When you look at the level of people who are killed compared to the African continent, the numbers are higher because of socioeconomic vulnerability. Without enhancing socioeconomic ability of people in the continent so that they can put more money in their pocket, empower themselves to be able to have alternatives, Africa will continuously be a very highly vulnerable continent in the coming years. And the challenges will only be exacerbated. While climate change is global, the poor in the continent, as I've said, are disproportionately afflicted because they lack the resources to quickly recover from its effects. Africa's effort to combat climate change must align with accelerating socio-economic transformation. Without this, premising critical thinking within ensuring the fundamentals, which are economic, to be addressed, we might be just missing the point. And that takes me to my second point, which is driving competitiveness. We ask how Africa can accelerate her socio-economic growth under climate change. And in this area of global competitiveness, it is very, very crucial to understand that Africa is 20 times less productive than competitors in the global space. We're talking in a continent where manufacturing, which is a source of socio-economic prosperity, and competitive enterprise has stagnated at 10% since the 70s. This means that the region must prioritize pathway that offers the shortest route to global competitiveness. And for this, one African proverb summarizes it quite very well, that a man does not wander far from where his corn is roasting. Where corn is roasting, you do not move away from where it is. It will be taken. We're talking in a continent. If you look outside, though it's not sunny, but Africa receives 365 days of sunshine. That's clean energy that can be tapped, but we are paradoxically in a continent where 620 million citizens are energy impoverished. No access to electricity. Not even to talk about access where solar dryers can be fabricated to add value. We're in a continent that, as I mentioned, 65% of uncultivated rebel land, but paradoxically 257 million citizens going to bed hungry. But what comforts us is that across the continent, there's no absence of progress People across the continent, for example, women are using environmental approaches to add value to what they can produce. What even agroforestry techniques, cassava farmers in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in Togo, even in Uganda, have increased their incomes by 150% and reduced post-harvest losses by 30%. And this was because solar dryers were decentralized to enable them to dry cassava. But understanding how we can bring this to scale and make this the norm, not the exception, will touch so many lives. That should be part of our critical thinking. And that takes me to my third point, which is skills retooling. In a continent today, with over 60% of the youthful population graduating into the labor market each and every year, 12 million of them, and that number is going to continuously get increased. What we must be able to do in our critical thinking space is how do we ensure that we retool the skills of these young people to be relevant to the challenges that the continent faces today so that they can become solution providers and not complainers in chief. That is the way that we must be able to think and leverage on that, because I have always argued this. Certificates are important, but certificates are more important when they are utilized to address challenges. And I always challenge young people, especially, that I got my PhD 10 years ago. That is not the point. It is not the aspect of getting the PhD that matters. What have I been doing 10 years ago with that PhD that have touched lives? That's a fundamental question. Because I ask this question because there is a kind of an elitist entitlement that being young is a qualification for things to be given to. No. Being youthful is a blessing, and youthfulness is not about age, but it's about ideas, and ideas towards solving problems. Ladies and gentlemen, we know of Prophet Moses, a historical figure, even 3 times of the world's largest organized religions, gives us one of the critical lessons we must embrace as critical thinkers if Africa is to lift people from the bottom of the pyramid using what we have. Because the question is, I don't have money. No, I cannot do anything because I don't have money. You have yourself. You have your skill. Your skill is the biggest premium. And that skill needs to be perfected. Using this example of Moses, just as we today are faced by these challenges that I've mentioned, Moses faced far worse. He had the raging Red Sea ahead of him, a ferocious army in hot pursuit, and the destiny of an entire nation to protect. With nothing but a staff in his hand, he was instructed to not fear and to raise the staff that was in his hand. And as he did, the result was a miracle that has never ever happened again on this earth. The Red Sea parted, and he led himself and an entire nation out of the jaws of death. As we gather here today, this staff in our hand is our skills and talents, and critical thinking should be to advance how we can continuously retool our skill to be relevant to the challenges of our time. If we miss that, we might not be able to lift people from the bottom of the pyramid. And this cannot be considered in silos, but in the context of the economic fundamentals that I mentioned. I shared already these economic fundamentals. Each of us, regardless of disciplinary background, it doesn't matter what you study. And I tell the young people this all the time. Most critical thinking should happen leveraging on our skills and talents. What we can do with what we have is important, not always waiting to have a lot more before we can do something. You ask someone, what are you doing? Why are you not thinking? No, I don't have money. Money cannot buy passion. Money cannot buy dedication. Of course, money is part of a means and not an end. But without critical thinking, leveraging on each and every one, on what we can do to continuously improve, refine, and adapt towards creating these competitive enterprises, we might not be able to lift people. And that takes me to my fourth point. Amidst all this, I believe one does not need a position or a title to be a leader. One does not need a position or a title to be a leader, and more so to change the world. The world can only be changed by our examples and not our opinions. It can only be changed by our examples and not our opinions. Opinions are not facts. Opinions are not facts. Leadership is taking responsibility to do right and to do the right thing and become an example. And the first person each and every one of us must lead is ourselves. If one cannot lead his or herself, then he should not even talk about the leadership itself. And that's a crucial element in critical thinking. Leading yourself to do the right thing, to think critically, to devise solutions to the challenges is quite very, very important. And as we do this, sometimes to solve problems, we always have these naysayers. But I always use this analogy of football. In the football field, we have 24 players. That's 11 players plus the goalkeeper, 2 of this side, 2 of this side, who are playing. And we have a stadium with over 60,000 people, fans, who have come to watch the football, but they make a lot of noise. But the players focus on playing the football with intent to score goals and win medals. But the noise on the stadium is just so much so that you would imagine that your ears can even get blocked. But at the end of the day, those who win the medals and the trophies are the players. So in critical thinking, we must focus on devising ways to solve the challenges and turn them to opportunities rather than listening to naysayers. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, no DO ever competed with the sun. Critical thinking will only take its rightful position in the mainstream of Africa's development by appreciating the realities and the fundamentals that we confront today. Otherwise, just like the morning dew is quickly vanquished at the earliest appearance of sun, critical thinking will remain at the peripheries of development in the continent, and its much needed impact will remain on the fringes of development as a mirage. Thank you.
And I think we're all inspired. How many of you will say, now I will take action myself? Okay, thank you so much.
Because the world today is a global village. A skill from a Kenyan is relevant to a Ghanaian, to a Cameroonian. What is read for the benefit, collective benefit of all, and to solve problems. So never be a complainer in chief.